By the late 1930s, sales of F-22s and 24s began to slowly creep upward. But it became obvious to Fairchild management that the true money in aviation lay in military contracts. In 1938, Fairchild Engineering, under the direction of Armin Thiebaud, began to design an aircraft for military training purposes. Realizing that the existing frontline fighter aircraft were monoplanes, and that all training planes at that time were biplanes, it was believed that an opportunity existed to convert the entire fleet of trainers. Thiebaud began to develop a low-wing monoplane with a cloth-covered steel frame. The plane had 2 seats with a metal-structured plate glass windshield for both student and instructor, and housed the Fairchild designed and built Ranger Inline 6 engine. In the summer of 1939, 2 Fairchild M62 trainers were entered in a competition at Wright Field, the U.S. Army Air Corps testing facility in Dayton, Ohio. Chief Fairchild test pilot Dick Henson took the plane through its paces and came away with a contract for 270 M62s. Dick had proved the worth of this little plane, and both the Army and Navy were convinced of its merits. Throughout 1940 and 41, orders for the M62, which had been newly designated the PT-19, continued to flow in from the U.S. military, as well as Allied militaries already at war. Civilian training organizations inside and out of the U.S. were placing orders for this much-needed aircraft training tool. As increased factory space was being planned, the U.S. was attacked at Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, and almost overnight the desired amount of PT-19 trainers increased tenfold. It was estimated that to handle the desired workload now required by the military, the factory would need to see a 3,500% increase from just prior to Pearl Harbor. This meant not only seriously increased factory space, but also a tremendous amount of added workers, all of which needed training, and all of which meant time. The beginning of World War II was an awakening for much of the population of Hagerstown. For many, it meant a switch from an agrarian life to one more urban. For men of military age, enlistment to fight overseas was seemingly inevitable, and for others, life as factory workers appeared every bit as likely. For those wanting to do their bit for the old USA, Hagerstown offered only a few choices. Being predominantly a farming community, the obvious choice for many was to help bolster the nation's food supply by working on the farm. Although a task highly noble and one desperately needed during times of war, it offered few accolades, and for most came second when compared to building weapons for national defense. With the outbreak of war in late 1941, Fairchild and the PT-19 were suddenly hurled into national and international prominence, and if not only by association, Hagerstown as well. Although a city of considerable industrial capability, it had remained throughout the 1930s a rather sleepy one of only 32,000 people. Several highly successful businesses, which made up the bulk of the economy, were homegrown and took pride in their association with the community. Among its most famous were the M.P. Moeller Pipe Organ Company, Brandt Cabinet Works, Hagerstown Leather Company, Staten Furniture Manufacturing Company, and Pangborn. As well, Hagerstown had a vibrant railroad life and served as a major hub for the Western Maryland, Baltimore and Ohio, and Pennsylvania railroads. The airport had continued to grow under the direction of Dick Henson throughout the 1930s and early 40s. At the beginning of World War II, the Henson Flying Service found itself uniquely suited through its pilot training to aid in national defense. Henson was awarded one of initially a very few contracts to house and train pilots. Dubbed Henson Ensigns, these cadets stayed in a specially constructed barracks built near the brick terminal. At the beginning of the war, Fairchild found itself facing a dilemma. To expand the factory to the size required would take time in excess of that which the military allowed. Equally, Fairchild primary training planes were those first needed to begin to teach potential pilots to fly. The company's only option, if it wished to supply aircraft to the military on a timely manner, was to devise a host of subcontractors who would manufacture parts, components, and sections of aircraft apart from the main plant. The Hagerstown System, as it became known, employed businesses throughout the city to manufacture parts and components which were in many ways related to the type of skills each had. The M.P. Moeller Pipe Organ Company, which was officially the largest pipe organ manufacturer in the country, had by nature of their business skilled woodworkers. In February 1942, the U.S. government officially asked Moeller to halt production on organs and immediately convert to the production of wooden wings and center sections for the Fairchild PT-19. Within 1 year, Moeller had produced, with an average of 1,200 workers, 3,400 wooden wings and over 2,000 center sections. By war's end, wings and center sections for over 5,000 aircraft had been completed. Hagerstown's furniture manufacturers also found themselves employed in the task of producing parts for war. The Brandt Cabinet Works, Beachley Furniture Company, and Staten Furniture Manufacturing Company had before the war been major producers of both reproduction wood furniture and upholstered chairs. Each were asked to cease production of these non-vital goods and convert to the production of wooden parts and sections for the Fairchild PT-19. Staten and Beachley, which had experience in upholstering chairs, also aided in the placement of the cloth covering over certain parts, while Brandt concentrated both on wooden fabrication as well as the welding of aluminum sections for both Fairchild and fellow Maryland aircraft manufacturer Glenn L. Martin. Brandt was also contracted by the U.S. Navy directly to produce Grumman Wildcat fighter aircraft mock-ups. These were to be used for training purposes and specifically for naval carrier deck crews. Involved in the creation of Fairchild airplanes was nearly every machine shop throughout Hagerstown. Each were assigned specific parts to be fabricated, with each needing boring, drilling, tapping, or splining. Such businesses as Foltz Manufacturing and Supply Company, Kaufman Manufacturing and Supply Company, Maryland Machine and Foundry Works, and the Mitchell Corporation, each were assigned specific parts to be made for Fairchild. By far the largest participant in the Hagerstown system was Fairchild itself. Apart from manufacturing primary training planes for the Army and Navy, Fairchild also produced the AT-21 Advanced Gunnery Trainer and the C-61 utility cargo airplane. From 1941 to 44, Fairchild produced approximately 1,200 PT-19 trainers each year. The AT-21, although developed in Hagerstown and the first few constructed here, was manufactured at the Fairchild plant in Burlington, North Carolina. This aircraft was built with parts manufactured under the Hagerstown system and shipped south for final assembly. In total, 166 of these aircraft were completed and used by the Army Air Force. Employment at Fairchild was 200 workers in 1939, and within 3 years it had risen to 3,500, and by 1943, no less than 8,000 employees worked in 25 different plants throughout the city. Fairchild itself served as a subcontractor for the Glenn L. Martin Company of Baltimore. The manufacture of the wings for the all-metal PBM-3C seaplane and the Model 187 were fabricated by Fairchild employees in the same building that housed the world's largest poultry show, located at the Hagerstown Fairgrounds. Some components for the wings were sent to Hagerstown from the Martin factory, but still others were manufactured under the direction of the Hagerstown system. The airport also served as port of entry and exit of Hagerstown system-built aircraft. It was abuzz with airplanes taxiing, taking off and landing. The ferrying of PT-19s and C-61s kept the landing strip and the community surrounding it roaring with sound. WAFs and WASPs of the Women's Auxiliary Flying Service and Women's Army Service Pilots organizations transported the finished airplanes to the necessary ports or military training bases. Dignitaries such as movie stars and high-ranking military personnel frequently flew into Hagerstown during the war, either to check out production or just en route to another destination, or simply to keep the morale up toward winning the war for Uncle Sam. At its height, the Hagerstown System involved 15 separate independent industries scattered throughout the entire city. Each industry had its own individual subcontracted parts, components, or sections of the aircraft for which they were responsible for casting, machining, or assembling. An entire fleet of trucks, most driven by women, were employed to move one part or section on to the next location. Some parts would be shipped to other plants or to other subcontractors. Still others would be transported back to the main plant for final assembly. All transportation from one location to the next was managed and arranged by Fairchild. Essentially, the company viewed Hagerstown as one gigantic factory rather than individual buildings dispersed in many cases miles from one another. The employment of Hagerstown's businesses in the production of PT-19 parts and components is only a fraction of the Hagerstown system. The need for increased factory space forced Fairchild to lease available buildings throughout the city. An entire network of factories were leased, and vacant buildings and unneeded storage facilities converted into factory floors. 25 different locations were utilized for the purpose of aircraft production during the first full year of the war. In total, 1 million square feet of space was used throughout Hagerstown, with the primary goal of producing more PT-19s.
The Hagerstown System became much more than simply a means to an end. What it did was create an atmosphere of community which never before could have been imagined. The mutual cause to which everyone was working focused on production for war, and more specifically than any other community, production of one particular product for war. The Fairchild PT-19 became the icon of Hagerstown's war effort and came to symbolize the sweat and labor of a single community and its fight for the preservation of land and liberty.